The voicemail arrived at 2:03 a.m., my mother's voice icy and scripted, telling me I was disowned and banned from Thanksgiving because my brother Julian had secured her finances. She didn't realize that the house, the cars, and her allowance were all legally mine. I made 3 calls and her world stopped. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The glowing numbers on my bedside clock read 2:03 a.m. when my phone vibrated against the nightstand. It wasn't a ring, just the short, distinct buzz of a voicemail notification. In my line of work, managing high-net-worth portfolios and cleaning up messy financial estates, a call at this hour usually meant a market crash in Asia or a client being arrested in a foreign country. I rolled over, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and reached for the phone. The screen was blinding in the dark room. "Missed call, Mom, new voicemail." My stomach tightened. My mother, Patricia, was not a night owl. Since my father passed away 5 years ago, she was usually in bed with a cup of chamomile tea by 9. A call at 2 a.m. meant an emergency. A fall, a heart attack, a fire. I didn't even bother turning on the lamp. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear, my heart already hammering against my ribs, ready to jump out of bed and rush to the hospital. But there was no panic in the voice that greeted me. There was no background noise of sirens or doctors. There was only a cold, hollow silence, followed by the sound of paper rustling, as if someone were reading from a script. "Elizabeth," my mother's voice said. She didn't say Lizzie or honey, just Elizabeth. The tone was unrecognizable, flat, brittle, and terrifyingly distant. "I am calling to inform you that you are not welcome at Thanksgiving this year, or Christmas." I sat up, the duvet falling away from my chest. The air in my bedroom felt suddenly freezing. "Julian and I have been discussing things," she continued, her voice gaining a strange, tremulous confidence. "We know what you've been doing. We know you've been using the trust to control me, to keep me on a leash like a child. Well, it stops now. Julian he has arranged new representation for me. He's already spoken to his attorney. We are removing you from everything. The accounts, the estate, the power of attorney, all of it." She paused. In the background, I heard a murmur, a deep male voice. Julian, he was coaching her. "Do not come to the house," she said, her voice dropping an octave, sounding almost frightened now, though she tried to mask it with aggression. "If you set foot on the property, Julian will call the police. We are done, Elizabeth. I'm finally free." The recording ended with a sharp click. I sat there in the darkness, the silence of my apartment pressing in on my ears. My hand was trembling, not from cold, but from a cocktail of shock and adrenaline. It wasn't just the cruelty of the words, it was the sheer, blinding absurdity of them. "She's finally free." I looked at the phone screen, the little play triangle turning into a replay icon. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Years of forensic accounting, of hunting down hidden assets and dealing with hostile litigations, had trained me for moments of crisis. My brain bypassed the emotional heartbreak and went straight to survival mode. I swung my legs out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "Free," I whispered to the empty room. She thought Julian, a man she had known for 4 months, had saved her. She thought she was cutting off a controlling, greedy daughter. She thought she had stripped me of my power. She had absolutely no idea that she had just severed her own lifeline. The betrayal was absolute, but the mistake she had just made was fatal. I didn't go back to sleep. I couldn't. Instead, I went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of black coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. While the machine gurgled and hissed, I sat at my dining table and opened my laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard. The hurt was there, a dull, aching throb in the center of my chest. This was my mother. The woman I had bathed when she was too depressed to move after Dad died. The woman whose bills I paid, whose medical appointments I scheduled, whose garden I paid landscapers to maintain because she loved her roses but couldn't kneel anymore. To hear her treat me like a criminal, like a parasite, was a physical blow. But as the caffeine hit my system, the hurt began to calcify into something colder. Julian. I typed his name into my notes app. Julian. No last name needed for now. I knew exactly who he was. The real estate entrepreneur with the leased BMW and the suit that fit just a little too poorly. The man who had swept into my mother's grief-stricken life at a charity gala. In July, and had effectively moved in by August. I took a sip of the scalding coffee and replayed the voicemail in my head. Julian has arranged new representation. We are removing you from everything. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. They had made a classic amateur mistake. They assumed that because I managed the money belonged to her. They assumed that because she lived in the house, the deed was in her name. My father had been a brilliant man, but he was paranoid. He knew Patricia had a good heart but zero financial literacy. He knew that if he died first, she would be a target for every con artist and sob-story grifter in the state. So, he had locked it all down. He hadn't just left me in charge, he had structured the entire estate into an irrevocable trust. Technically, Patricia owned nothing. Not the house she was sleeping in, not the car she drove, not even the credit card she used to buy Julian his expensive scotch. It was all owned by the Harrison Family Trust, and the sole trustee, with absolute discretion, was me. I picked up my phone, 4:15 a.m. It was early, but Megan would be up. Megan was my best friend since law school, a corporate shark who ate breach of contract cases for breakfast. She was also the only person who knew the full extent of the legal fortress I had built around my mother. I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice raspy but alert. "Elizabeth, is everyone okay?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "Patricia just left me a voicemail. She's kicking me out. She says Julian got her a lawyer and they're taking everything." There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of Megan shifting in bed. She realizes the trust is irrevocable, right? We wrote it that way specifically for this scenario. The pool boy scenario, I believe we called it. It's not a pool boy, it's Julian. And no, apparently they don't realize it. They threaten to call the police if I show up for Thanksgiving. Wow, Megan exhaled. Okay, so what's the play? Do we send a cease and desist? Do we send them a copy of the deed? I looked at the sunrise just beginning to bleed purple and orange over the horizon. I thought about the way my mother's voice had sounded, scripted, manipulated, weaponized against the only person who actually protected her. If I just sent a letter, Julian would spin it. He would tell her I was lying, that I was bullying her. He would drag this out for months while draining her personal checking account. No, I needed to stop the bleeding immediately. I needed to show them the reality of their position. "No letters," I said, opening the banking portal on my laptop. "We're going nuclear. I need you to prep the eviction notice for the property. Don't file it yet, just draft it. I want it ready." "Done," Megan said, the click-clack of her own keyboard already audible in the background. "And the other 2 calls. I'm calling the private banking division at 7 a.m. when the desk opens," I said, watching the cursor blink on the screen. "And before that, I'm calling the security company." "Elizabeth," Megan warned gently, "if you do this, she's going to freak out. It's going to be ugly." "She told me not to bother coming," I said, typing in my master authorization code. "She wants to be independent? Fine. Let's see how independent she is when the credit card declines." They had forgotten one crucial thing. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the only thing holding the roof over your head. To understand why this voicemail shattered me, you have to understand the last 5 years. When my father died of a sudden aneurysm, my mother didn't just grieve, she vanished. She stopped eating. She stopped showering. She stopped paying bills. I was 31, just making partner at my firm, working 80-hour weeks. I dropped everything. I moved back into the guest room for 6 months. I sorted through piles of unopened mail. I fought with insurance companies. I sat on the floor with her while she cried, spoon-feeding her soup like she was a toddler. I didn't do it because I wanted control. I did it because I loved her. She was soft, artistic, and kind. She was the woman who had taught me to paint and who always smelled like lavender laundry detergent. But she was fragile. She had gone from her father's house to my father's house without ever writing a check or reading a contract. That vulnerability was exactly what Julian saw when he met her. I met Julian for the first time 2 months ago. It was a Sunday dinner. I had driven an hour to see Mom, bringing groceries and a bottle of wine. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at the head of the table, my father's seat. "You must be Elizabeth," he had said, not standing up to shake my hand. He was a handsome man in a generic way, silver fox hair, capped teeth, a tan that looked like it came from a bottle. He wore a heavy gold watch that I instantly recognized. "Ed as a fake Rolex. Patricia talks about you nonstop." "Nice to meet you," I had said, trying to be polite. Throughout dinner, I watched him. I watched how he refilled her wine glass before she had even finished it. I watched how he touched her arm every time she started to speak, subtly guiding the conversation. But mostly, I listened to him talk. He spoke in buzzwords. He was leveraging assets in emerging markets. He had deal flow in commercial residential zones. It was word salad. To a layman, he sounded successful. To a forensic accountant, he sounded like a walking Ponzi scheme. "You know, Elizabeth," he had said over dessert, leaning back in my father's chair, "your mother has a lot of equity sitting dead in this house. In this market, that's a crime. I've been telling her we could double her liquidity if we moved it into a high-yield private trust I manage." The air in the room had stopped. "The house isn't hers to sell, Julian," I had said calmly, taking a sip of water. "It's in a family trust." His eyes had flickered, just for a microsecond, a flash of irritation. Sure, trusts can be dissolved though, amended, if the beneficiary wants it." "Not this one," I said, locking eyes with him. That was the moment. I saw it on his face. He realized I was the gatekeeper. He realized that as long as I was in the picture, he couldn't get to the millions my father had left behind. From that day on, the campaign against me began. I didn't see it at first. It was subtle. Mom started canceling our lunch dates. She started making odd comments about how I worked too much and didn't understand true happiness. She stopped asking me for advice and started quoting Julian. "Julian says I'm paying too much for the landscapers. Julian says you're too aggressive with the portfolio. Julian says family shouldn't control family money." I tried to warn her. I told her to be careful. I asked for his background, his company name. She accused me of being jealous. She accused me of not wanting her to be happy. And now here we were, 4:30 am on a Friday morning. The 3 phone calls were my countermove. Call 1, the security company. I dialed the number for the high-end security firm that monitored the estate. "This is Elizabeth, passcode Alpha 9 Victor. I need to update the access list for the Maple Drive residence immediately." "Go ahead, ma'am. Remove all guest codes, reset the alarm, and flag the user Julian as unauthorized. If the alarm is triggered, do not call the house. Call the police." Call 2, the bank. This one would have to wait until 7 a.m., but I queued up the transfer requests online. I was moving the operating capital, the money used for groceries, gas, and Julian's dinners, out of the joint checking account and back into the main trust holding account. I wasn't stealing it. I was securing it. I left the account with exactly $0. Call 3, the credit card company. I held the Platinum Amex in my hand, the supplementary card I had issued to my mother for emergencies and lifestyle expenses. It had a $50,000 limit. I dialed the fraud department. "I need to report a compromised card," I said, my voice flat. "Please freeze the secondary card ending in 4098, effective immediately." I hung up the phone. The sun was fully up now. The sky was a brilliant, indifferent blue. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I was the surgeon stepping up to the table. They wanted to play games with my father's legacy. They wanted to threaten me with police. Good luck with that, I whispered. I showered, dressed in my sharpest blazer, and drove to my office. I had a full day of work ahead of me, and I knew with absolute certainty that my phone would start ringing by 9:00 a.m. The silence in my office was heavy, broken only by the hum of the server in the corner and the rhythmic tapping of my own fingers on the desk. My assistant, Sarah, had brought me a second cup of coffee and a bagel I hadn't touched. She knew something was wrong. I never stared out the window at 9:00 a.m. on a workday, but she was smart enough not to ask. I was watching the clock on my computer screen. 9:12 a.m. My mother's routine was clockwork. She would wake up at 8, have her tea, and then drive to the upscale market on 4th Street to buy fresh pastries and whatever artisanal ingredients Julian had requested for lunch. She would fill her basket, walk to the register, and hand over the Platinum Amex. 9:14 a.m. My cell phone, sitting face up on the mahogany desk, lit up. Mom. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds, letting the vibration rattle against the wood. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the trustee, not the daughter. I picked it up and swiped green. Hello. Elizabeth. Her voice wasn't the icy, scripted robot from the voicemail at 2 a.m. It was high-pitched, breathless, and laced with panic. Elizabeth, there is something wrong with the bank. I'm at the market, and the card the machine says R. Effort to issuer. I tried it 3 times. There is a line of people behind me, Elizabeth. It's humiliating. I leaned back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look at the city below. I'm sorry, who is this? Stop it, she snapped. You know it's me. Fix the card. I don't know what computer glitch you caused, but fix it right now. There is no glitch, I said, my voice terrifyingly even to my own ears. You left me a voicemail last night, remember? You said you and Julian were independent. You said you were removing me from everything. I simply respected your wishes. What are you talking about? She demanded, though I could hear the waver in her voice. I said we were getting a new lawyer. I didn't say cut off my grocery money. That's not your money, Patricia, I said, using her first name. It felt like a slap, and I heard her gasp on the other end. That is the trust's money, the trust established to support the family. Since I am no longer family, per your voicemail, I have a fiduciary duty to freeze those assets until the legal situation is resolved. I can't have unauthorized third parties accessing trust funds. Unauthorized, I am your mother. You're a hostile party threatening litigation, I corrected. And Julian is a security risk. By the way, the checking account is also empty. I've moved the operating capital to a secure holding account. If you want to buy those pastries, I suggest you ask Julian to use his successful real estate earnings. There was a silence on the line, a long, heavy silence. Then I heard a muffled voice in the background, Julian asking what was wrong. You left me with nothing, she whispered. I left you with exactly what you asked for, I said. Independence. Good luck, Mom. I hung up. My hand was shaking as I set the phone down. It felt cruel. It was cruel. But dealing with a narcissist, or someone under the spell of one, required absolute boundaries. If I gave an inch, Julian would take a mile. I didn't have time to mourn the relationship. I had work to do. I opened my secure browser. It was time to find out exactly who Julian was. I started with the basics. I pulled the background report I should have run 2 months ago. Julian Vance, 55 years old. Address listed at a P.O. box in a strip mall in Henderson, Nevada. Okay, Mr. Vance, I muttered, typing furiously. Let's see where your money comes from. I ran his name through the state licensing board for real estate agents. No record found. I ran it through the National Broker Database. No record found. I checked the Secretary of State's business entity search for the company he claimed to own, Vance Global Holdings. Status dissolved, involuntary dissolution by the state, failure to pay taxes. Got you, I whispered. But that was just sloppy administrative work. I needed dirt. I needed the kind of leverage that would send him running before he could drain my mother's emotional reserves any further. I switched to the Federal Court Records database, PACER. I searched for Julian Vance in bankruptcy filings. Nothing. That was odd. Men like him usually had a trail of Chapter 7s behind them. Unless. I paused, looking at a photo of him I had saved from my mother's Facebook page. He was wearing that tacky gold watch. I zoomed in. It wasn't just tacky, it was specific. A limited edition knockoff sold online under a specific brand. It was a small, petty detail, but it made me think. I went back to the Vance Global Holdings filing. I looked at the original incorporation documents. There, buried in the PDF, was a cosigner, Monica Vance. I searched for Monica, and there it was, a divorce filing from 3 years ago in Arizona, Vance v. Vance. I pulled the divorce decree. It was a goldmine. The court transcripts detailed a pattern of financial dissipation. Monica had alleged that Julian, whose legal name was actually Julian Vancetti, had drained their retirement accounts to fund non-existent investment opportunities. Julian Vancetti. I typed the real name into the criminal database. The screen populated with a list that made my blood run cold. Fraud by deception, dismissed. Theft by conversion, settled. Passing bad checks, convicted, probation. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a grinder. A low-level grifter who moved from woman to woman, bleeding them dry before moving to the next state. And now, he was sleeping in my father's house, driving my father's car, and convincing my mother that I was the villain. I hit print, the laser printer word to life, spitting out page after page of his history. I had the leverage, now I just needed the trap. My phone rang again at 11:30 a.m. This time, the caller ID didn't say Mom. It was a blocked number. I knew who it was. I put the call on speaker, leaning back in my leather chair, the stack of court documents sitting like a loaded weapon on my desk. "This is Elizabeth." "You listen to me, you little bitch." The voice was deep, smooth, and vibrating with rage. The mask had slipped. The charming entrepreneur who sipped scotch and talked about synergy was gone. This was the street hustler from the court records. "Hello, Julian," I said, keeping my voice dangerously pleasant. "Or should I call you Mr. Vancetti?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds, but it told me everything. I had hit the nerve. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he snarled, recovering quickly. "But Patricia is in tears. You've humiliated her. We're at the bank right now, and they're telling us the accounts are frozen. You have no legal right to do this." "I have every legal right," I countered. "Read the trust bylaws, Julian." "Oh, wait, you can't. You're not a beneficiary, you're a guest who is currently trespassing." "Trespassing?" He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "I live there. Patricia invited me, and let me tell you something, Elizabeth, we've already called my attorney. We're filing an emergency injunction this afternoon. We're going to sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. We're going to strip you of that license you're so proud of." "Is that the same attorney who represented you in your bad check charge in 2018? I asked casually, flipping a page of the report in front of me. "Or is it the one from your divorce in Arizona, where you were accused of hiding $40,000 in a shell company?" "You're lying," he spat, but his voice cracked. "You're making things up." "I have the court transcripts right here, Julian," I said, my voice hardening. "I know about Vance Global Holdings. I know about the dissolved LLCs in Nevada. And I know that you have a tax lien of $12,000 outstanding in Maricopa County." I leaned closer to the speakerphone. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to pack your bags." "Patricia," he yelled, turning away from the phone, clearly performing for an audience. "She's threatening me. She's making up lies about my past to try and separate us. She's psychotic." I heard my mother's voice in the background, sobbing. "Elizabeth, please, stop this. Why are you doing this?" "I'm doing this because he's a conman, Mom," I shouted, breaking my own rule of staying calm. He's not a developer, he's broke, he's using you. She's jealous, Patricia, Julian said, his voice coming back to the phone, dripping with venom. She wants to control you. She can't stand that you're happy. But don't worry, I'm going to fix this. We're going to sell the artwork. We don't need her money. My blood froze. The artwork? My father had collected rare maritime oil paintings. They were hanging in the study. They were worth, collectively, maybe $200,000. And unlike the house or the bank accounts, they were physical assets, portable assets. If Julian took them to a pawn shop or a shady dealer, they would be gone forever. If you touch one painting, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, I will have you arrested for grand larceny before you make it to the driveway. Try me, Julian hissed. It's Patricia's house, it's her property. She can gift it to me if she wants. And guess what? She just did. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had pushed him. I had revealed my hand too early. Instead of scaring him off, I had backed a rat into a corner. And now, he was going to loot the ship before it sank. I grabbed my purse. I couldn't wait for Monday. I didn't drive to the house. That's what he wanted. He wanted a screaming match on the front lawn where he could call the cops and claim I was harassing an elderly woman. He wanted to paint me as the unstable aggressor. Instead, I drove to Megan's office. Megan was already waiting for me in the conference room, a thick file folder spread out on the glass table. She looked at my face and grimaced. He's escalating, I said, throwing my purse on the chair. He threatened to sell the maritime collection. He claims Mom gifted it to him. Megan tapped her pen on the table. Legally, that's a gray area. If she verbally gifted it to him and he sells it, proving theft is hard. We'd have to prove undue influence or incapacity. That takes months. We need something faster. I have his record, I said, tossing the stack of papers I'd printed onto the table. Fraud, bad checks, but nothing that puts him in jail today. Megan flipped through the papers, her eyes narrowed. Wait, Arizona, 2021, the divorce decree. I saw it, financial dissipation. No, look closer, Megan said, pointing to a paragraph on page 12. The ex-wife, Monica, she mentions a joint venture they secured with a private lender using a forged signature. The judge struck it from the record because it was outside the scope of family court, but she claimed he forged her name on a loan application. I looked at Megan. If he did it once, he'll do it again, she finished. Elizabeth, did your mother sign anything recently? Any investment papers he brought her? I thought back to the voicemail. Julian has secured my finances. He's trying to get a loan, I realized, the horror dawning on me. He can't sell the house because of the trust, but he could try to take out a high-interest personal loan in her name. Or, oh God, the vacation cabin. My father had a small fishing cabin 3 hours north. It wasn't in the main trust. It was in a separate LLC that my mother managed directly. It was the one asset I hadn't moved because it was worth so little, maybe $80,000. But to a desperate man, that was a fortune. Check the county recorder for the Northern District, I commanded. Megan was already typing. A moment later, she swore softly. Pending recording, she read. Quitclaim deed, Patricia Harrison to Vance Global Holdings, dated yesterday. He was stealing the cabin. He had convinced her to sign it over to his shell company. That's it, I said, standing up. That's the smoking gun. It's self-dealing. He's taking advantage of a vulnerable adult. We have enough for an emergency guardianship order, or at least a temporary restraining order. It's Friday afternoon, Elizabeth, Megan warned. Courts are closing. Then we need to stop him socially before we stop him legally, I said. Where is he taking her? He said they were independent. He needs to keep up the appearance of wealth to keep her hooked. I pulled up my mother's shared calendar, something she had forgotten to revoke my access to. Friday, 7:00 p.m., gala dinner at the country club. Of course, the annual autumn charity ball. All of her friends would be there. All of my father's old business partners. It was the center of her social universe. Julian would be there, parading her around, wearing his fake Rolex, probably trying to solicit investors for his fake company, using my mother's reputation as bait. I looked at Megan. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. "He wants to play the big shot," I said, picking up the stack of evidence, the criminal record, the dissolved companies, the quitclaim deed. "Let's see how he handles a performance review." "Elizabeth," Megan said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "you're not going to the gala." "I am," I said, "and I'm bringing receipts." I spent the next 3 hours assembling the dossier. I wasn't just bringing papers, I was building a narrative. I called Monica in Arizona. She was hesitant at first, but when I told her Julian was targeting another widow, she broke. She sent me a video affidavit via email, a 2-minute clip of her explaining exactly how Julian had ruined her credit and stolen her jewelry. I saved it to my tablet. I called the security company again. "I need the logs of who entered the house today." Mr. Vance entered at 1:00 p.m. and left at 1:45 p.m. with 2 large boxes, the guard confirmed. "The paintings, he had taken them." "Did you stop him?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We couldn't, ma'am. Your mother was with him. She told us they were going to be cleaned." He had crossed the line. He had stolen my father's legacy right off the walls. I looked at the clock, 5:30 p.m. I went to the bathroom in Megan's office and fixed my makeup. I put on my armor, my sharpest black dress, my heels, and my diamond studs. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the executioner. I walked out to the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. Monday morning was too far away. The confrontation wasn't going to happen in a courtroom. It was going to happen tonight, over champagne and hors d'oeuvres in front of the entire town. The country club was a fortress of limestone and old money, glowing warm and golden against the dark autumn night. Valets in white jackets were sprinting back and forth, parking Jaguars and Merceds, while the sound of a string quartet drifted out through the open French doors. I pulled my car up to the front, ignoring the valet who reached for my door handle. I wasn't staying long enough to park. "Keep it close, Jerry," I said, handing him a 20. "I'll be out in 10 minutes." I walked up the grand staircase, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble. My heart was a drum in my chest, a chaotic, violent rhythm that threatened to drown out the polite chatter of the lobby. This was the place where I had taken swimming lessons as a child. It was where my parents had celebrated their 25th anniversary. It was safe ground. Or it used to be. I scanned the ballroom. It was a sea of black ties and sequins. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the crowd. And there, in the center of the room, holding court at table 1, was Julian. He looked every inch the part he was playing. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, likely bought with the cash withdrawal he'd made before I froze the accounts. He had one hand resting possessively on the back of my mother's chair, the other holding a champagne flute. He was laughing at something the club president, Mr. Henderson, was saying. My mother, Patricia, looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She was wearing her favorite emerald gown, but her posture was slumped, her smile tight and brittle. She looked like a prop, a trophy. I took a deep breath, clutching the leather portfolio under my arm, and began to walk. The room seemed to quiet as I moved. People turned. They knew me. They knew the situation because gossip in this town traveled faster than light. They saw the look on my face, a look of cold, terrifying purpose, and they parted like the Red Sea. I didn't stop until I was standing directly across the table from them. "Elizabeth," Mr. Henderson said, looking surprised, "we didn't expect to see you." "I wasn't invited," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the music. "But I couldn't miss the performance." Julian's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went dead. He took a sip of champagne, trying to maintain the alpha facade. "Elizabeth, I assume you're here to apologize? Patricia and I are trying to enjoy a nice evening." I'm sure you are, I said, especially since it's likely your last one as a free man. My mother looked up, her eyes wide and wet. Elizabeth, please, not here, don't make a scene. I'm not making a scene, Mom, I said gently, though I didn't take my eyes off Julian. I'm making a report. I opened the portfolio and pulled out the first document, the quitclaim deed. Tell me, Julian, I said, dropping the paper onto the white tablecloth between the crystal glasses. Why is the title to the family cabin in the name of Vance Global Holdings as of yesterday afternoon? A company that, according to the Nevada Secretary of State, was dissolved 3 years ago for tax fraud. The table went silent. Mr. Henderson leaned in, looking at the document. Julian's jaw tightened. That is a private business arrangement. Patricia and I are restructuring her assets for tax efficiency. You wouldn't understand, you're just an accountant. I am a forensic accountant, I corrected, and I understand perfectly. It's called commingling funds. It's called theft by deception. I pulled out the second document, the criminal background report. And this, I said, dropping the thick stack of papers next to the deed, is your curriculum vitae. Passing bad checks in Ohio, 2018. Insurance fraud in Arizona, 2021. And a restraining order filed by a Monica Vansetti 3 years ago. Julian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The string quartet stopped playing. The entire ballroom was watching now. That is slander, he shouted, his face turning a mottled shade of red. These are lies. Patricia, look at me. She forged these. She's trying to destroy us because she wants your money. My mother looked back and forth, trembling. She looked at the papers, then at Julian. Julian, you said you were a widower. I am, he lied, desperate now. Monica died, this is a different Julian. Really? I asked, because she looked very alive when I FaceTimed her 2 hours ago. I pulled out my tablet. I had queued up the video. I didn't just show it to the table. I propped it up against the centerpiece and turned the volume to maximum. Monica's face filled the screen, tired but clear. My name is Monica Vansetti. The man you know as Julian Vance is my ex-husband. He stole $40,000 from my retirement fund. He forged my signature on a second mortgage. He is a predator. If he is with a woman named Patricia, tell her to run. Tell her to check her jewelry box. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother let out a sound, a small, strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her throat, to the empty space where her diamond necklace usually sat. She had told me she wasn't wearing it because the clasp was broken. She turned to Julian. The fog in her eyes was gone, replaced by a horror so pure it was painful to watch. Where is it? She whispered. Where is the necklace? You said you took it to the jeweler. Julian looked around the room. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the crowd. He saw Mr. Henderson reaching for his phone to call security. The charm evaporated. The posture collapsed. He looked like exactly what he was, a cornered rat. You ungrateful old hag, he sneered at my mother, his voice dripping with venom. I spent months listening to your boring stories. I tolerated your whining. I earned that money. The gasp from the crowd was audible. And you, he spat, turning to me, pointing a finger. You think you're so smart? You can't touch me. It was a gift. She gave it to me. Actually, I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. We have the security footage of you leaving the house with the maritime paintings at 1:45 p.m. today. Those paintings are property of the Harrison Family Trust. You are not a beneficiary. That make it grand larceny. And since the value exceeds $100,000, it's a Class B felony. I gestured to the main doors. 2 uniformed police officers, whom I had called from the parking lot 10 minutes ago, were walking through the entrance, guided by the club manager. Good luck with that, Julian, I said, repeating the words I had said to the voicemail that morning. Julian looked at the cops, then at the French doors leading to the patio. For a second, I thought he was going to run, but he just slumped. He knew it was over. As the officers approached and cuffed him, reciting his rights in front of the town's elite, I didn't watch him. I watched my mother. She sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming silently down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked at the empty space where Julian had been, then she looked at the papers on the table, and finally, she looked at me. She didn't look angry, she looked shattered. I walked around the table, ignoring the whispers and the stares. I knelt beside her chair and took her hand. It was ice cold. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Lizzie, I'm so sorry." "I know," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "Let's go home, Mom." The fallout was swift, brutal, and legally fascinating. Julian, or Mr. Vansetti, make bail. With no fixed address, a history of flight, and active charges of grand larceny, the judge remanded him to county jail pending trial. It turned out he hadn't even had time to fence the paintings. They were found in the trunk of his leased BMW, wrapped in blankets, along with my mother's diamond necklace and 3 of her vintage watches. The recovery of the physical items was easy. The recovery of my mother took much longer. The Monday morning I had promised came and went, but instead of Julian calling me, it was me sitting in my mother's sunroom, watching her stare out at the garden. The house was quiet. We had changed the locks. We had scrubbed the guest room where he had stayed, but his ghost, the embarrassment, the violation lingered in the hallways. Patricia was deeply ashamed. For the first week, she barely spoke. She felt stupid. She felt like she had betrayed my father's memory by letting a grifter sleep in his bed and drive his car. I took 2 weeks off work. I didn't hire a nurse or a therapist. I just stayed. I made the coffee. I answered the phone calls from well-meaning neighbors so she wouldn't have to. I sat with her while she cried, listening as she unpacked the loneliness that had made her vulnerable in the first place. "He made me feel seen," she confessed one afternoon, holding a mug of tea with both hands. "After your father died and you got so busy with work, I just felt like a piece of furniture in this big house." Julian asked me questions. He looked at me. "I know, Mom," I said, feeling a pang of my own guilt. "That's how they work. They find the empty spaces and they fill them with lies." "I said horrible things to you," she said, looking at me with watery eyes. "That voicemail, I don't even know who that was." "That wasn't you," I said firmly. "That was him speaking through you. It's over. The trust is secure. The cabin is back in your name. I filed the correction this morning, and the money is safe." She reached out and touched my face. "You saved me. I tried to cut you off, and you saved me anyway." "That's what the trust is for," I joked weakly, trying to lighten the mood. "Protection from enemies, foreign and domestic." She laughed, a wet, shaky sound, but it was real. Thanksgiving arrived 3 weeks later. It wasn't the big party she had originally planned. We didn't invite the extended family. We didn't go to the club. It was just the 2 of us in the dining room. I had cooked. Badly, I might add, since culinary skills were not part of my skill set, but the turkey was edible and the wine was excellent. We sat at the smaller table by the window, not the long, formal table where Julian had once presided. The house felt lighter. The oppressive tension of the last few months was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile peace. "I have something for you," Mom said as we finished dessert. She reached under the table and pulled out a small, flat box. It wasn't jewelry. It was a framed document. I took it and turned it over. It was a legal amendment to the trust, drafted by Megan. Amendment to the Harrison Family Trust. Designation of co-trustee. "I read it," she said, her voice steady. "I actually read the whole thing this time. I want to learn, Elizabeth. I don't want to be the victim anymore. I want you to teach me how the money works. I want to manage it with you." I looked at her. She wasn't the helpless widow anymore. She was bruised, yes, but she was rebuilding. She was taking responsibility. "I would love that," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. We clinked our glasses. "To independence," she said, reclaiming the word Julian had tried to weaponize against us. "To fa." "Miley," I replied. The nightmare was over. Julian was in a cell facing 10 to 15 years. My mother was safe. And as for me, I had learned a valuable lesson, too. I had learned that protecting the money wasn't enough. I had to protect the person. And if anyone ever tried to come for my family again, they wouldn't just be dealing with a daughter. They would be dealing with the trustee, and I never lose.